History is a vast and sprawling tapestry woven with threads of long, grueling conflicts that stretched for years, even decades. We think of the 100 Years' War, the 30 Years' War, the endless struggles that reshaped the world. But what if I told you one war was over in less time than a TV program? It sounds impossible, yet it's entirely true. On the morning of August 27th, 1896, the mighty British Empire went to war with the small Sultanate of Zanzibar. The conflict began at 9:02 a.m. By 9:40 a.m. it was all over. This is the Anglo-Zanzibar War, the shortest recorded war in history. This was no minor skirmish, it was a full-scale naval bombardment, a brutal display of overwhelming force. One side left in smoking ruins, the other virtually untouched. To comprehend the war, one must first understand the prize, Zanzibar. Located just off the coast of modern-day Tanzania, the Zanzibar archipelago was no mere backwater. For centuries, it had been a vital nexus of trade, a vibrant melting pot of Arab, Persian, Indian, African cultures. Its strategic position made it a crucial hub for the trade routes crisscrossing the Indian Ocean. By the 19th century, Zanzibar, under the rule of the Omani sultans, had become fabulously wealthy. This wealth was built on two pillars: the lucrative ivory trade from the African mainland and, most famously, the cultivation of cloves. The islands became the world's leading producer of this precious spice, earning Zanzibar the romantic moniker, the Spice Islands. However, there was a darker side to Zanzibar's prosperity. The island was also one of the last great slave markets in the world. For decades, it served as the epicenter of the brutal East African slave trade, a reality that brought it into direct ideological conflict with Great Britain. The British Empire, having abolished slavery within its own territories, embarked on a global crusade to suppress the trade. This moral mission conveniently aligned with Britain's strategic and commercial interests. By positioning the Royal Navy in the Indian Ocean to intercept slave ships, Britain could simultaneously project its power, disrupt the economies of its rivals, and extend its own influence over the vital sea lanes connecting Europe to India and the Far East. Zanzibar officially became a British protectorate, its sultan still on the throne, but his foreign policy and, increasingly, his domestic affairs, dictated by the British Crown. The delicate balance of power in Zanzibar rested on the personalities of its leaders. For several years the system worked because the Sultan, Hamad bin Thuwaini, was a compliant and pro-British figure. Placed on the throne with British backing in 1893, Sultan Hamad understood the realities of his position. He cooperated with the British consul. He implemented policies favoured by the empire. He did not challenge the protectorate status that defined his rule. To the British, he was the ideal ruler, a man who provided a veneer of local authority. On the other side stood his cousin, Khalid bin Bargash. Khalid was a stark contrast to the pliable Hamad. Ambitious, charismatic, deeply resentful of the creeping British influence over his homeland. He viewed the protectorate as a national humiliation. He believed that Zanzibar should be governed by its own people, not by a foreign consul. Khalid had previously made a bid for the throne in 1893 upon the death of the previous sultan. But the British had swiftly intervened to install their preferred candidate, Hamad. Khalid was forced to stand down. He spent the next 3 years quietly gathering support among factions at court and within the populace who shared his anti-colonial sentiments. The primary British official on the scene was the consul, Basil Cave, a seasoned diplomat. Cave was the embodiment of British authority on the island. His job was to manage the Sultan and ensure that Whitehall's directives were carried out without question. On August 25, 1896, the fragile peace shattered. Sultan Hamad bin Thuwaini died suddenly at the palace. While the official cause wasn't announced, many suspected poisoning. Suspicion immediately fell upon Khalid bin Bargash. Whether responsible or not, Khalid wasted no time. Within hours, he executed a well-planned coup. With the support of the palace guard and a significant number of armed retainers, he seized the Sultan's magnificent wooden palace overlooking the harbour and declared himself Sultan of Zanzibar. This was a direct, audacious challenge to British authority and a clear violation of the Protectorate Treaty. Consul Basil Cave reacted immediately and decisively. He refused to recognise Khalid's claim, calling it rebellion. Cave had a preferred candidate, Hamoud bin Mohammed. Cave sent stern messages to Khalid demanding that he stand down, lower his flag and disperse his forces. Khalid was now surrounded by nearly 3,000 armed men, many former slaves and local citizens loyal to him, yet he flatly refused. He believed the British were bluffing, confident in popular support and military strength. As the sun rose on the morning of August 27, 1896, an eerie calm settled over the Zanzibar waterfront, a stark contrast to the frantic preparations of the night before. Inside the palace, Sultan Khalid bin Bargash remained defiant, surrounded by his loyalists. His force numbered around 2,800 men, but their armament was a motley collection. Most were equipped with antique muzzle-loading rifles and swords. They did possess a few Maxim machine guns and a Gatling gun, gifts from Queen Victoria to the previous Sultan, but doubtful their troops were trained to use them effectively. The Sultan's most formidable asset on paper was his personal royal yacht, the HHS Glasgow. It sat at anchor nearby, its small cannons representing the entirety of Zanzibar's navy. Floating in the harbour, silent and menacing, was the British flotilla: HMS St George, HMS Philomel, HMS Raccoon, HMS Thrush and HMS Sparrow. Aboard them, around 900 Royal Marines and sailors stood at their stations, drilled and disciplined. The technological and professional disparity between the two forces was a chasm. Throughout the tense final hour, frantic last-minute negotiations took place. Basil Cave repeatedly warned Khalid of the impending destruction, urging him to see reason and prevent a bloodbath. At precisely 9:02 in the morning, just 2 minutes after the ultimatum expired, Admiral Rawson gave the order. The calm of the morning was shattered as guns opened up. HMS Raccoon, Thrush, Sparrow. High explosive shells screamed across the short expanse of water and slammed into the Sultan's wooden palace. The effect was honestly instantaneous and catastrophic. Huge chunks of the facade splintered into the air shells, tore through the timber walls and detonated inside. The palace, a symbol of Zanzibari sovereignty, had never been built for modern artillery. The defenders in and around the palace were thrown into chaos. Their antique rifles were utterly useless against the armoured warships. They returned fire, but bullets simply pinged harmlessly off the steel hulls. The Sultan's few modern machine guns were brought into action, but they were quickly located and silenced by naval gunners. Meanwhile, the lone vessel of the Zanzibari Navy, the HHS Glasgow, bravely attempted to engage the British fleet. Its crew fired its small-caliber cannons at the formidable HMS St George. The response was swift and pitiless. The British flagship trained its heavier guns on the Glasgow and fired. The shells ripped through the yacht and it quickly began to sink, its flag still flying as it disappeared beneath the waves. The bombardment was mercilessly efficient. The smaller ships continued to pound the main palace structure, reducing it to a flaming wreck. HMS Philomel turned its guns on the palace harem. Within minutes, the entire palace complex was ablaze, thick plumes of black smoke pouring into the sky. Panic set in and many began to flee in terror, abandoning their positions and trying to escape the carnage. By 9:40 in the morning, the guns fell silent. The entire conflict had lasted a mere 38 minutes. Where the magnificent Sultan's palace had once stood, there was now only a smoking, skeletal ruin. The waterfront was a scene of devastation and chaos. HHS Glasgow lay at the bottom of the harbour. A small Zanzibari boat lay sunk. Another small Zanzibari boat lay sunk. The bombardment had been a terrifyingly precise and overwhelming display of military power. The British suffered only a single casualty. A petty officer aboard HMS Thrush was lightly injured. The cost to the Zanzibari side was immense. An estimated 500 defenders had been killed wounded. Khalid had fled to the German consulate and his forces were dead, wounded, scattered. The fighting was officially over. British Marines landed to secure the shore, finding no further resistance. They moved quickly to extinguish fires threatening Stone Town. The Union Jack was raised over the devastated area. The new Sultan, Hamoud bin Mohammed, was a loyal and obedient ruler who owed his position entirely to British military intervention. One of his very first acts, heavily advised by Basil Cave, was to issue a decree formally abolishing slavery in Zanzibar for good. This was a landmark moment. While suppression of the slave trade had been gradual, the 38-minute war provided the catalyst for final eradication. This act was hailed in London as a humanitarian victory and a justification for the violence used. The ruined Sultan's palace was demolished and a new modest ceremonial palace was built, a constant reminder of the price of defiance. The British tightened their administrative grip, placing advisors in key government positions and running the finances and bureaucracy. The Protectorate became direct oversight. Zanzibar's autonomy was gone. It became a colony in all but name. Consul Basil Cave was commended and promoted, and Admiral Rawson was praised in Britain. The war was presented to the British public as a necessary police action. 5 modern warships versus a poorly armed palace guard. The imbalance was framed as proof of British civilization and power. It reinforced the imperial mindset and deterred other local rulers from resisting. The speed and ruthlessness showed challenges would be met with overwhelming force. Industrialized nations could project power across the globe and subdue local resistance with minimal cost to themselves. The 38-minute war was the scramble for Africa in a single morning's work, a demonstration of new global power rules at century's end. It condensed industry, diplomacy and force into a single swift act. Today, the Anglo-Zanzibar War is primarily remembered for its astonishing brevity, securing its place in record books as the shortest war in history. This keeps it alive in memory, but it also risks trivializing the event. The war was far more than a curiosity. It symbolized the zenith of European imperialism. It was a time when the technological and military gap between industrial powers and the rest was at its widest. 38 minutes of gunfire in Zanzibar Harbour were a brutal expression of that imbalance. A clash not between two armies, but between two different centuries. The conflict is a case study in gunboat diplomacy, the conspicuous display of naval power used to intimidate a weaker state into compliance. The British did not want a prolonged war, they wanted compliance. The war teaches the cold logic of power, politics. Sometimes the threat of overwhelming force matters as much as its use. Understanding both views is crucial to grasping colonialism's painful legacy, where a victory for one could be a catastrophe for another. Ultimately, the war endures because it is stark and digestible. It condenses imperialism, technology, and power into one dramatic episode. It reminds us history can turn on a single morning.